Lieutenant Cole's world exploded into chaos at precisely 8:47 hours. One moment, his Navy SEAL team was moving through the rocky Afghan terrain on what command had assured them was a routine reconnaissance mission. The next moment, the mountain itself seemed to open fire. Bullets screamed past his head with a sound like angry hornets, shattering rocks into razor-sharp fragments that peppered his face, drawing blood. Contact! Contact! Someone screamed. It was Petty Officer Second Class James, the team's communications specialist. But the word contact was meaningless. Contact meant you could see the enemy. Contact meant you knew where the fire was coming from. This wasn't contact. This was blind slaughter. Cole dove behind a massive boulder, his weapon raised, eyes scanning the hillside frantically. Where was it coming from? The gunfire was impossibly accurate, rounds finding gaps between boulders like a hunter stalking prey with supernatural precision. It wasn't random suppression fire. It was calculated, deliberate, and relentless. Every shot seemed to anticipate where his men would be. "Where's it coming from?" Cole roared, but his voice drowned in the deafening symphony of death. His elite operators, men who'd trained for every conceivable scenario, who'd fought in 3 wars, who'd been shaped by years of operational excellence, were panicking. He could hear it in their breathing, see it in their movements. These weren't scared soldiers. These were confused warriors facing an enemy they couldn't fight back against. Minutes felt like. Each second stretched into an eternity of terror. SEAL Team 9 had trained together for 8 months. They'd practiced assault insertions, close quarters combat, hostage rescue, direct action raids. They'd prepared for IEDs, suicide bombers, ambushes from predictable positions. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for this. A round suddenly punched through the space where Cole's head had been milliseconds before. If he'd turned his head a fraction of a second later, the bullet would have cored straight through his skull. His heart hammered against his ribs so violently he thought it might explode. "Suppressive fire," Cole screamed, and his men responded with disciplined volleys toward the hillside. Dust erupted from the mountainside, but Cole knew they were firing blind. They weren't hitting anything. They were just making noise, hopping to intimidate an enemy that seemed completely unaffected by their attempts at counterfire. The futility was crushing. One of his SEALs, Petty Officer Dutch, a veteran of 16 combat deployments, took a hit. Cole heard the distinctive thump of a high-velocity round impacting flesh, followed by a scream of pure agony. Dutch collapsed, blood spraying across the dust in a crimson arc. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" he screamed, his hand clutching at his chest where a round had shattered his ribs. "Medic," Cole bellowed, but the word felt hollow. The medic, Tommy, was pinned down 3 positions away, unable to move without becoming the next target. Another SEAL, Jackson, took a round to the shoulder, then screamed as a bullet grazed his leg, tearing through muscle and bone. Cole realized with cold horror that his team was being systematically destroyed. Whoever was shooting wasn't trying to suppress them or force them into retreat. They were trying to execute them. This wasn't a standard ambush. This was assassination. Cole's mind raced through possibilities. Sniper had to be, but from where? His sniper scope had a maximum effective range of 1,400 meters in ideal conditions. This shooter, if it was a single shooter, was operating beyond his understanding of what was possible. Unless command had missed something, unless there was an intelligence failure, unless there was something on this mountain that wasn't supposed to exist. "Cover, cover, get down," Cole screamed, and his remaining operational soldiers pressed themselves into the rocks trying to become invisible. But rocks were just rocks. They could be penetrated. Body armor could be overcome. And professional snipers knew exactly where to aim to guarantee fatality. Cole's mind spiraled toward panic, something that hadn't happened in 20 years of combat operations. His team was going to die on this mountain, and he had no way to stop it. Then, breaking through the radio static, cutting through the chaos like a knife through water, a young voice spoke with absolute calm. "Sir, I see him, 2,000 meters, maybe further." Cole's blood froze completely. His mind couldn't even process the words correctly at first. 2 kilometers, that wasn't possible. That was beyond human capability. But before he could respond, another SEAL screamed. A round had found his neck and blood erupted like a fountain. The scream lasted 3 seconds, then stopped abruptly. Silence. A man had died. Cole's jaw clenched so hard he thought his teeth might crack. And somewhere in the chaos, that young voice repeated, "I can take him, sir." Dakota Mitchell stood calmly amid the chaos, rifle steady against his shoulder, eye glued to his scope like the world wasn't burning around him. He was positioned 30 meters from Cole, behind a relatively sturdy outcropping that provided decent cover from the enemy fire. While every other soldier in the vicinity was either screaming, bleeding, or firing blindly into the mountainside, Mitchell was perfectly still, almost meditative. His breathing was controlled, methodical, the breathing of a man completely at peace with death. To anyone watching, it would have seemed impossible that a 20-year-old could maintain such composure while seasoned warriors fell around him. But Mitchell wasn't really aware of them anymore. The moment he'd looked through his scope, the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. 2,100 meters exactly, sir, Mitchell repeated, his voice eerily composed as another burst of enemy fire tore through the rocks above his position. He didn't even flinch. The bullets that would have sent any normal soldier scrambling for deeper cover seemed to pass through Mitchell's awareness without registering. Winds at 3 knots from the northeast. Elevation plus 4 minutes. I can take him. Cole stared at this impossibly calm young man from Wyoming, a kid who looked like he should be in a college classroom somewhere, not holding the literal key to whether his entire team lived or died. Cole had reviewed Mitchell's file after he'd been attached to the SEAL team 3 months ago, and it was remarkable in its own way. Perfect scores in every marksmanship qualification. Uncanny ability to read wind conditions. An almost supernatural sense of distance estimation. And a peculiar, unsettling absence of fear in any combat scenario. But 2 kilometers, 2,100 meters, that was beyond Special Forces mythology, that was stepping into superhero territory. Cole had been fighting wars since before Mitchell was born. He'd trained with the best marksmen in the world. He'd seen world-class snipers make impossible shots at extreme distances. But even the legendary Carlos, the deadliest sniper in military history, had struggled with shots beyond 2,000 meters. The physics alone were nightmarish. At that distance, a bullet would be in flight for nearly 4 seconds. Wind could push it meters off target. Gravity was a cruel mistress. The curvature of the Earth became a factor. You had to account for effect, the rotation of the planet itself. It wasn't just difficult. It was basically impossible. "You sure, kid?" Cole whispered desperately, his eyes still scanning the hillside even as he spoke. Another round impacted near his position, spraying fragments of ancient rock. His heart was still hammering wildly, adrenaline flooding his system, making everything feel surreal and hyperreal simultaneously. The screams of his wounded men echoed in his ears. The smell of blood and cordite filled the air. The sound of enemy gunfire was relentless, methodical, professional. And this 20-year-old kid was talking about making a shot that the laws of physics. Mitchell didn't respond immediately. Instead, he closed his eyes for a single breath, a moment of absolute stillness. When he opened them again, there was something different in his gaze, something older, something that suggested he'd seen things, done things that most 20-year-olds couldn't even imagine. "I've made longer shots in training, sir," Mitchell said quietly with absolute certainty. 400 meters longer, actually. During Operation Enduring Freedom, I made a confirmed kill at 2,400 meters. Wind's worse today, but the target's bigger. Light conditions are better. Elevation's easier. I can take him. Cole's jaw clenched. His team was dying. Right now, in real time, warriors were bleeding out because of an enemy he couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't touch. One more SEAL screamed, a leg shot that sounded like it had shattered femur. The scream was primal, animalistic, the sound of a man whose entire lower body had just been destroyed. Cole had been in command long enough to recognize the turning point. This was the moment where decisions made the difference between survival and annihilation. This was the moment where leadership meant making an impossible choice with incomplete information. He could order his team to retreat, to fall back and call for air support. But retreat meant moving across open ground while being fired upon by a shooter that accurate. Half his team would probably die in the retreat. He could order suppressive fire and try to pinpoint the shooter's location through the return of fire patterns. But that would take time, and time was a luxury he didn't have. Every second, another man could be hit. Or he could trust a kid who looked like he belonged in a dormitory, not a combat zone. A kid whose file suggested he was something genuinely different from normal human soldiers. A kid who spoke with absolute confidence about making a shot that should be impossible. "Make the shot," Cole commanded, his voice like steel. "Make the shot," Cole commanded, his voice like steel cutting through the chaos. Mitchell nodded once, no hesitation, no doubt, no dramatic pause, just a simple acknowledgement of orders received. He began moving with mechanical precision, adjusting his scope with the steady hands of a surgeon, while bullets continued tearing through the air around them, missing him by inches through pure luck. Cole watched, transfixed, as this young man seemed to slip into another dimension entirely. The screams faded. The gunfire became background noise. The world around Mitchell simply ceased to matter. Time seemed to slow. Mitchell's breathing became rhythmic, almost meditative, in through the nose for 4 counts, out through the mouth for 6. His body relaxed into the weapon. The rifle became an extension of his skeleton, his muscles, his nervous system. Years of training crystallized into this single moment. He'd spent countless hours on rifle ranges, in simulators, in training scenarios, practicing the exact mechanics of what he was about to attempt. Most shooters would have been paralyzed by the pressure, by the knowledge that lives depended on a single shot, by the sheer technical difficulty of the task. Mitchell simply disappeared into the mathematics. His right eye pressed against the scope. The world became a small circular window of reality. Distance markers appeared in his field of view, hash marks that told him exactly how far away his target was. 2,100 meters. His finger found the trigger guard. His left hand adjusted for wind. 3 knots from the northeast meant a drift of approximately 47 centimeters at this distance. His breathing continued steady, calm, ancient. Cole's jaw clenched as he watched Mitchell settle into position. The kid's face showed absolutely no emotion, just pure, terrifying focus. His eyes had changed. They'd become something else entirely. Not cold exactly, but detached, clinical. The eyes of someone observing a mathematical problem that needed solving. Cole realized he was witnessing something rare in human experience. The moment when a warrior achieves perfect synchronization with their instrument of death. World disappeared for Mitchell. There was only his heartbeat, the mountain breeze carrying that 3-knot wind, the gentle slope of the terrain, and the mathematics of ballistics. Bullet velocity, 2,850 feet per second. Distance, 2,100 meters. Time of flight, approximately 3.8 seconds. Gravity drop at that distance, 94 inches. Wind drift, 19 inches. Effect at this latitude, negligible but present. His scope adjusted for all of it. His body became a calculation engine. Come on, Cole whispered, almost a prayer. Another of his men screamed. Someone had taken a round. The sound barely registered on Cole's consciousness anymore. Everything had narrowed down to this single moment, this single shot, this single kid who held his team's survival in the steadiness of his hands. Mitchell's finger tightened on the trigger, not jerked, not yanked, tightened, a slow, deliberate application of pressure. His mind was completely empty now. No thoughts, no doubts, no awareness of his own existence separate from the rifle, just the trigger, the target, and the distance between them. 4 pounds of pressure, 5 pounds, almost there. A single shot cracked across the valley, a report so sharp and distinct that it cut through even the continuous background of enemy gunfire. The sound was almost musical in its clarity, a note of perfect precision in an orchestra of chaos. Cole's spotter, positioned 3 meters away with binoculars already raised, gasped slightly. The sound rolled through the mountains like thunder, echoing off distant peaks, traveling across the impossible distance. Then nothing, absolute silence. The enemy fire stopped, not paused, not momentarily interrupted, stopped, completely. The continuous hammer of outgoing rounds from the hidden position simply ceased. For 3 seconds there was only the sound of Cole's own men breathing, the wind moving across the rocky terrain, and the distant rumble of thunder from the mountains. Cole's spotter raised binoculars with shaking hands, scanning the distant hillside through the lenses. His eyes widened. His mouth opened. For a moment he couldn't speak. When he finally did, his voice was barely a whisper. "Target down, sir. 2K plus. Confirmed kill." The words hung in the air like a benediction. Cole looked at Mitchell, who was already breaking down his rifle with mechanical efficiency, his hands moving through the familiar motions of immediate action after firing. The SEAL commander realized something fundamental had just happened. This kid, this impossible, calm, terrifying young man, had just rewritten the rules of warfare. He'd taken a shot that military doctrine said shouldn't exist. He'd crossed a boundary that separated the merely excellent from the genuinely transcendent. Cole's hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer weight of what he'd just witnessed. A warrior had been born on this mountainside. The question now was, what would they do with him? The story of Mitchell's 2-kilometer kill shot spread through forward operating base like a virus through an immune system with no defenses. By the time the SEAL team arrived back at base, escorting their wounded and their dead, the narrative had already mutated into something approaching mythology. A 20-year-old kid from Wyoming had made an impossible shot, a shot that shouldn't exist, a shot that had saved an entire Navy SEAL team from annihilation. The details grew more grandiose with each retelling. Some soldiers claimed it was 2,300 meters, others insisted it was further. The number didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the legend. Within hours, soldiers gathered around the Wyoming kid like he descended from Mount Olympus carrying divine truth. "Is it true? Did you really? That's impossible." Mitchell sat in the mess hall eating his meal with mechanical efficiency, forking food into his mouth without tasting it, seemingly completely unaware of the dozens of eyes fixed upon him with a mixture of awe and something darker, envy. Cole watched from the shadows near the coffee station, observing the transformation happening in real time. Mitchell was becoming legend, and legends are dangerous. Legends are dehumanizing. Legends are isolating. Cole had seen it happen before to exceptional soldiers. They performed something extraordinary, and suddenly they ceased being human beings and became symbols instead. A full colonel approached Mitchell's table, Colonel James Harrison, commander of the Special Operations Task Force. The senior officer pulled up a chair without asking permission, a casual assertion of rank that made the entire mess hall go quiet. "That was some shooting, Ranger," Harrison said, his voice carrying across the room. "I've been reading the after-action report. 2,147 meters. Confirmed kill through a rifle scope at that distance. Do you understand how rare that is?" Mitchell looked up from his food, chewing slowly before responding. "No, sir. I just shot where I aimed." The simplicity of the statement was somehow more powerful than any boast could have been. It suggested that Mitchell didn't understand why anyone thought what he'd done was impossible. Within a day, Special Operations Command was calling. Within 3 days, Mitchell had offers from Delta Force, CIA paramilitary units, and classified programs that didn't officially exist, the kind of programs that operated in shadows so deep that even Congress didn't know about them. Each offer was substantial. Each promised advancement, higher pay, access to the most classified operations on the planet. Each came with implications that Mitchell was special in a way that transcended normal military hierarchy. One offer from a program that hadn't been officially acknowledged since 1983 promised Mitchell could write his own ticket, choose his own assignments, his own teams, his own targets. Cole made a critical decision that would echo through the rest of his life. He pulled rank, called in favors from generals who owed him from decades of service, reminded people of operations he'd led that had shaped geopolitical outcomes across 3 continents. He ensured that Dakota Mitchell remained attached to his SEAL team, under his direct command, operating within the established chain of command rather than disappearing into some classified black site. It wasn't altruism, exactly. Cole understood something fundamental. Mitchell needed guidance, mentorship, and connection to his own humanity. If the kid disappeared into the world of classified operations, surrounded by people who viewed him only as a weapon, there would be nothing left of Dakota Mitchell the human being within 2 years. The decision cost Cole politically. Senior commanders viewed his actions as blocking potential enhancement of their operational capabilities. He was told, in carefully coded language, that his career advancement had likely just hit a ceiling it wouldn't pass. But Cole didn't care. He'd spent enough years watching exceptional soldiers get chewed up by the machine. Mitchell was different. The kid had made an impossible shot, yes, but Cole had seen something else in Mitchell's eyes afterward, a flicker of humanity, a moment where the weight of what he'd done had actually registered. That was the moment where mentorship became possible. Over the following weeks, Cole ensured Mitchell received proper decompression counseling, mandatory physical therapy for the strain of extreme distance shooting, and most importantly, regular conversations where the kid wasn't being treated as a weapon or a celebrity, but as a young human being trying to process an extraordinary experience. Cole shared his own combat experiences, the faces that still visited him in nightmares, the decisions that had cost lives, the weight of command that never truly disappeared. He showed Mitchell that legendary soldiers were still just men, capable of breaking, capable of doubt, capable of fear. By the end of the month, something had shifted between them. Mitchell started seeking Cole out during downtime, asking questions about more than just tactics and techniques. Cole realized that what was forming between them went beyond the standard mentor-subordinate relationship. They were becoming brothers, bound by the shared understanding that warfare demanded everything from a person, but offered nothing in return except the knowledge that you'd done your duty. The legend had found someone who saw the human underneath the myth. 3 months later, Dakota Mitchell had accumulated 19 confirmed kills. 19. Most elite snipers, men who'd spent entire careers perfecting their craft, who'd attended the most exclusive sniper schools on the planet, who'd been selected from hundreds of thousands of candidates, accumulated that many kills across entire operational deployments spanning years. Mitchell had done it in 90 days. The statistics were almost incomprehensible. His kill-to-engagement ratio was phenomenal. His average engagement distance was 1,800 meters. His first-round hit probability was 98.3%. By every metric that the military used to measure sniper excellence, Mitchell had shattered records that had stood for decades. But Cole noticed something chilling happening in parallel with Mitchell's operational success. The kid was becoming hollow, increasingly hollow. Mitchell sat alone during meals now, rejecting attempts at camaraderie with mechanical politeness. He spoke only when directly ordered to speak. His meals went largely uneaten. Cole would find nearly full trays in the disposal after Mitchell left. Most disturbing were his eyes. They developed that 1,000-yard stare, the expression of someone whose consciousness had retreated so far inward that the external world had become merely a theater where other people performed while he observed from behind bulletproof glass. Soldiers either Mitchell like a deity descended into human form, or they resented him with an intensity that bordered on hatred. The worship was suffocating in its own way. Men who'd been operational for 15 years would approach Mitchell with barely concealed envy, asking him to validate their own marksmanship, seeking his approval like priests seeking validation from a saint. Others, particularly senior non-commissioned officers who'd built their identities around being the unit's best shots, watched Mitchell with expressions of pure resentment. They'd sacrificed decades to achieve excellence, and this kid had arrived and made them all seem mediocre by comparison. Mitchell seemed equally destroyed by both reactions. The worship was dehumanizing. The resentment was isolating. There was no middle ground, no space where Mitchell could simply be a soldier among soldiers. He occupied a different category entirely now, and that category was profoundly lonely. Cole found him awake at 300 hours on a Tuesday morning, sitting alone in the armory, methodically cleaning his rifle for the fourth time that day. The weapon was already immaculate, there was nothing left to clean. But Mitchell's hands moved through the familiar motions anyway, muscle memory expressing itself through mechanical repetition. "Talk to me, Dakota," Cole said quietly, pulling up a chair beside the young marksman. For a long moment, Mitchell didn't respond. His hands continued moving, disassemble, clean, reassemble, repeat. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Sir, I'm not human anymore." The words hung in the cold air between them like a death sentence. "I'm a tool, a weapon. That's all I am. I look at people now and I don't see humans, I see targets. I calculate their death the way normal people calculate distance to a coffee shop. I think about ballistics and wind correction and elevation when I'm looking at someone's face." Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as he continued cleaning. "I made that last shot 3 days ago." The one command said was impossible, the Taliban commander in the compound. "I didn't hesitate, I didn't question it, I just calculated and executed. And afterward I felt nothing. Nothing, sir. A man is dead and I felt absolutely nothing." Cole's chest tightened. This brilliant kid, this extraordinary young man who'd arrived at the FOB just a few months ago full of uncertainty and humanity, was fragmenting under the weight of perfection. The burden of being a god had crushed the man underneath. "You're still human," Cole said firmly, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Listen to me. You hear me?" Mitchell finally looked up, and Cole saw the abyss staring back at him through his young soldier's eyes. Cole began talking then, really talking. He shared his own nightmares, the faces of men he'd killed who'd done nothing to him personally, the weight of command decisions that had cost lives, the way guilt operated in the human psyche like a cancer that never stopped spreading. He talked about the time he'd executed a detainee who'd attacked his team, and how that single act had haunted him for 17 years. He discussed the psychological mechanisms that combat soldiers used to distance themselves from the moral weight of their actions. Compartmentalization, dehumanization, the creation of psychological barriers between the warrior and the human being. "The fact that you felt nothing scares you," Cole continued. "That means you're still in there, Mitchell. A completely broken person wouldn't care about being broken. They'd accept it as normal. The fact that you're terrified of what you're becoming, that's your humanity screaming for help. That's the part of you that's still Dakota Mitchell, the kid from Wyoming who loved hunting elk with his father." Mitchell's face crumpled. Tears fell, not the controlled tears of a man being professional, but the devastating, body-racking sobs of someone whose emotional barriers had finally collapsed completely. Cole held the young marksman while he broke, understanding finally that Mitchell wasn't a superhero or a weapon or a legend. He was a scared kid carrying apocalyptic responsibility, and he needed someone who understood that the most dangerous thing in warfare wasn't enemy bullets. It was the slow destruction of your own humanity. That night something fundamental shifted between them. They became brothers. Command's new assignment arrived via encrypted email at 600 hours, marked with the highest classification level. Cole read it twice, then a third time, hoping the words would somehow change. They didn't. The mission parameters were designed to break anyone, eliminate a high-value Taliban leader named who was hiding in an urban compound in Kandahar City, surrounded by a minimum of 40 civilians, possibly more. The target was located approximately 3 kilometers from the closest viable shooting position. One mistake, one miscalculation, one gust of wind that Mitchell didn't account for meant potential massacre. Civilian casualties would ignite international incidents. It would create propaganda that would fuel recruitment for terrorist organizations for years. It would destroy careers. It would potentially destroy lives beyond the physical realm. Cole found Mitchell in the compound's weight room, pushing himself through an intense set of pull-ups with the kind of mechanical desperation that suggested he was trying to outrun his own thoughts through physical exhaustion. Sweat poured down his face. His muscles trembled with fatigue. He'd clearly been at it for hours. "We have a job," Cole said quietly. Mitchell dropped from the bar and turned to face his commander, already knowing from Cole's tone that this wasn't routine. Cole briefed him on the specifics. Mitchell's hands began shaking halfway through the explanation. Not from fear of combat, they both understood that Mitchell had moved past normal fear. This was different. This was existential terror. "What if I miss, sir?" Mitchell whispered when Cole finished speaking. "What if the round goes through and hits a civilian? What if there's a child in the next room and my bullet penetrates 3 walls and—" His voice broke completely. "What if I become a murderer, sir? What if I kill innocent people?" Cole placed a steady hand on Mitchell's shoulder, gripping firmly enough that the young marksman had to focus on the physical sensation rather than spiraling into catastrophic thinking. "Listen to me very carefully, Dakota. You won't miss. I know you won't miss because I've watched you shoot for 3 months. I've observed your discipline, your focus, your commitment to precision. More importantly, you understand the weight. Fear means you're still human. Fear means you still comprehend the moral dimensions of what you're doing. Use that fear. Let it make you careful. Let it sharpen your focus. The moment you stop being terrified of the consequences is the moment you become the weapon you're afraid of being." The mission launched 48 hours later. Mitchell spent those 2 days in a state of controlled preparation that Cole had never witnessed before. The young marksman cleaned his weapon obsessively, checked and rechecked his ammunition, studied aerial photographs of the target compound from every conceivable angle, calculated wind patterns, reviewed ballistic tables, and barely slept. Cole stayed with him through most of it, understanding that Mitchell needed presence more than he needed advice. The actual insertion went smoothly. Mitchell and Cole positioned themselves on a rooftop 3 kilometers distant from the target compound, setting up their equipment in darkness. The scope was equipped with thermal imaging. They could see heat signatures moving inside the building. Mitchell could see the civilians. He could see the children. Cole watched as Mitchell's face went pale when the thermal imaging revealed at least 3 small figures in the compound. Kids. The target was hiding behind children. 3 minutes to window, Cole whispered. Intel had indicated that would be in a specific room for exactly 4 minutes, a prayer window where his schedule was predictable. After that, the window would close for 6 hours. If they missed this window, the operation would have to be aborted and giving time to discover that his location had been compromised. Mitchell settled into position. His breathing began the familiar pattern, in for 4 counts, out for 6. But this time, Cole could hear the tremor in his breath. This time, the young marksman was genuinely fighting for control. Cole placed a hand on Mitchell's back, simply being present. No words, no tactical advice, just presence. Just understanding that sometimes the most important thing a leader could do was simply be there when a soldier had to step into the abyss. "You can do this," Cole finally whispered. "I believe in you." Mitchell's hands steadied, the scope focused. The crosshairs found their target through 3 walls, 300 meters of darkness, and the weight of impossible responsibility. Cole held his breath. The entire world seemed to pause, waiting for Mitchell to pull the trigger. One pull, one fraction of a second, one decision that would determine whether innocence survived or whether Mitchell would carry the weight of civilian deaths for the rest of his life. Mitchell's finger tightened on the trigger. His eyes closed for a single heartbeat, a moment of prayer perhaps, or final acceptance of whatever came next. Then his eyes opened. His finger finished its motion. The rifle bucked once. The suppressor muffled the shot to a sound barely louder than a cough. Through the thermal imaging, they watched as the heat signature in the target room simply vanished. The round had found its mark with absolute precision. No secondary signatures altered. No civilian heat signatures changed position. Perfect execution. But Mitchell didn't celebrate. Instead, he collapsed backward against the rooftop, body racking with silent, devastating sobs. Cole held him while he broke completely, understanding finally that Mitchell wasn't a superhero. He was a human being who just stared directly into the abyss and emerged transformed. Intelligence arrived like a thunderbolt at 300 hours, delivered by a nervous captain with sweat stains on his uniform despite the frigid temperature of the operations center. Taliban commander, the man Mitchell had supposedly killed 2 years ago in that legendary first engagement, the sniper who'd pinned down Cole's SEAL team and forced Mitchell to make an impossible shot, was actually alive. Completely alive. A body double had died that day. The man Cole's team had been hunting for 2 years, the ghost that haunted their operational memories, had been conducting operations the entire time, orchestrating attacks, building networks, planning something catastrophic. And now, intelligence confirmed, was planning Operation Eternal Night, a coordinated assault on 3 separate military installations scheduled to launch in 72 hours. The attack would strike Forward Operating Base, Camp Leatherneck, and a classified CIA detention facility simultaneously. Conservative casualty estimates suggested minimum 500 killed, potentially 3,000 if secondary explosions propagated through the facilities as planned. Had become obsessed with one thing: killing Dakota Mitchell. The young American marksman had become the central focus of his existence. Everything else was secondary to eliminating the kid who'd made an impossible shot and lived to tell about it. Cole read the briefing 3 times, each reading making his chest. Command was mobilizing for Operation Vengeance, an unprecedented direct assault on Mountain Fortress, a position so fortified that standard military doctrine said it was unassailable. The compound was carved into mountainside rock, featuring overlapping fields of fire, redundant defensive positions, ammunition caches, and an estimated garrison of 200 hardened Taliban fighters. Command was committing an entire battalion plus air support. They were throwing everything at this problem because the alternative, allowing to execute Operation Eternal Night, was unacceptable. Mitchell was standing beside Cole when he finished the briefing. The young marksman had a way of appearing when Cole needed him, as if some invisible connection had developed between them that transcended normal communication. "It's him, isn't it?" Mitchell asked quietly. Cole nodded. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes, something darker, something more dangerous than anything Cole had seen before. "Then we finish this." The assault began at dawn. Explosions erupted across the mountainside as Apache helicopters pounded the compound with hellfires, and F-16s screamed overhead, dropping 500-pound bombs that shook the earth like an angry god expressing displeasure. Cole's battalion moved through the destruction, expecting to encounter minimal resistance after the air campaign. They were wrong. Fighters had survived the bombardment by sheltering in deep bunkers, and they emerged with ferocious determination, laying down interlocking fire that immediately pinned down 3 entire companies. Cole's team took casualties immediately. A lance corporal took a round to the abdomen and collapsed screaming. A sergeant took shrapnel from a nearby explosion and lost most of his left arm. Another soldier, just 19 years old on his first deployment, took a headshot and died instantly. The assault stalled. They couldn't advance. The enemy positions were too well fortified, their fields of fire too comprehensive. For 30 minutes, Cole's battalion was pinned in place, taking fire from a dozen different positions, unable to effectively suppress the enemy. Then Mitchell moved. The young marksman didn't ask for permission. He simply emerged from cover and began relocating to different positions with lethal grace, moving like a ghost across the killing ground. His rifle cracked 5 times in rapid succession. Each shot found a target that Cole's soldiers couldn't even see. An enemy machine gunner who'd been devastating their position simply vanished mid-burst. A sniper in an elevated position fell backward without ever firing another shot. An RPG gunner exploded outward in a spray of blood when Mitchell's round penetrated his ammunition vest. 4 perfect shots from increasing distances, each one eliminating a threat that had seemed unsolvable moments before. Cole watched, transfixed, as the young marksman performed miracles of marksmanship under conditions that would have paralyzed normal soldiers with fear. Mitchell wasn't afraid. Mitchell wasn't even hesitant. He moved with the confidence of someone who understood at a fundamental level that his rifle was an extension of his consciousness, that distance meant nothing, that the enemy's defensive positions were simply geometry problems waiting to be solved. The assault resumed. Cole's battalion advanced through the compound, fighting room to room, stairwell to stairwell. But the final target, the primary objective, remained himself. Intelligence suggested he was attempting to reach a hidden tunnel system that would allow him to escape deeper into the mountains. A runner brought Cole the confirmation, was sprinting for the exit, approximately 2,300 meters distant, across open terrain with minimal cover. Cole found Mitchell and simply pointed. The young marksman chambered a single round, settled into position, and looked at his commander. Cole nodded. Mitchell took the final shot. The final shot cracked across the Afghan wilderness with a sound like destiny announcing itself. The bullet traveled through space at 2,850 feet per second, covering 2,300 meters in approximately 2.6 seconds. Was mid-stride when the round found him, hitting with the force of a sledgehammer, entering his spine and exiting through his anterior chest cavity. The Taliban commander's body tumbled down the mountainside like broken machinery, rolling across rocks and scrub brush until it came to rest in a ravine 300 meters below his starting point. He was dead before he stopped moving. The compound fell within minutes after that. Enemy fighters, understanding that their leader was dead, their fortress breached, their cause effectively ended, either surrendered or attempted escape through the tunnel systems. Cole's battalion secured the location methodically, clearing each room, extracting intelligence from computers and documents, gathering evidence of planning for Operation Eternal Night. Intelligence analysts would spend months sorting through the captured materials, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. The man who'd become the ghost that haunted Cole's operational memories for 2 years was finally, irrevocably dead. As Cole's team secured the compound's perimeter and established defensive positions, he found Mitchell sitting alone on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. The young marksman was staring into the distance with tears streaming silently down his face. Not tears of victory, Cole understood that immediately. Not tears of triumph or relief or celebration. These were tears of release. Mitchell had been holding something inside for so long that it had compressed into a singularity of emotional pressure. Now, with dead, with the mission complete, with the impossible finally accomplished, that pressure was escaping in the only way it could. Cole sat beside his young soldier without speaking. Sometimes words were the enemy of understanding. Sometimes silence was the only appropriate response to what human beings were capable of enduring. They sat together as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the valley in shades of gold and crimson, transforming the landscape of violence into something almost beautiful. After nearly 10 minutes, Mitchell spoke. His voice was quiet, raw, stripped of all the professional composure that normally characterized his speech. "I'm done, sir. After this deployment, I'm leaving special operations. I'm done being a weapon. I'm done being a god. I'm done carrying the weight of being something more than human." He paused, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "I want to be just another soldier in your unit. No glory, no legend, no special status. Just normal. I want to be normal again." Cole smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in months. The expression felt strange on his face, as if his facial muscles had forgotten how to perform the function. "That's the tactical decision you've ever made, son. Do you understand why?" Mitchell shook his head. Cole continued, "Because legends aren't human beings. Legends are myths, stories, ideas that people project onto. The moment you accept legendary status, you stop being Dakota Mitchell and become a symbol instead. Symbols don't have doubts. Symbols don't have fears. Symbols don't break. But human beings, real human beings, they have the capacity for growth, for connection, for redemption. That's infinitely more valuable than any legend." They sat watching the sunset paint the valley in colors that seemed impossible, watching the light transform the landscape from a theater of warfare into something approaching sacred. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of their battalion establishing a secure perimeter, could hear the helicopters arriving to extract wounded, could hear the machinery of military logistics grinding into operation. But here, on this rocky outcrop, there was only peace. "What happens now?" Mitchell asked quietly. Cole considered the question carefully before responding. "Now we go home. We get debriefed, we file reports, we attend ceremonies where politicians will congratulate us for actions they don't understand. And then we get back to work. Because there will always be another threat, another operation, another moment where we're needed. But this time you'll face it as a soldier, not as a weapon. As part of a team, not as a lone god. Does that work for you?" Mitchell nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, that works." As they prepared to leave the compound, as darkness fell across the mountains and stars emerged in the Afghan sky, Cole placed a hand on Mitchell's shoulder. The same gesture he'd made countless times before, but this time it felt different. This time it carried the weight of everything they'd shared, everything they'd endured, everything they'd learned about themselves and each other. "Welcome home, Dakota," Cole said quietly. And for the first time since the legendary 2-kilometer shot that had changed everything, Dakota Mitchell smiled, genuinely, deeply, like a soldier who'd finally found peace. Not peace from combat, not peace from the burdens of warfare, but peace with himself. He'd looked directly into the abyss and discovered that he was still human. He'd carried the weight of being a god and learned that mortality was a gift, not a curse. He'd become legendary and discovered that legends were less valuable than connection, less precious than belonging. As they walked down the mountainside toward their waiting helicopters, toward their battalion, toward whatever the future held, Cole understood that the real story wasn't about impossible shots or tactical brilliance or military excellence. The real story was about two warriors, one seasoned by decades, one tested by crucible, who discovered that mentorship, brotherhood, and shared sacrifice were the only things that made the burden of warfare bearable. The legend had learned to be a man, and that, Cole understood, was the greatest achievement of all. The end.